Massachusetts, 2015. A cold case that began with a haunting discovery on the rocky shoreline of Deer Island would grip a nation. A small child, wrapped in a blanket, discarded in a trash bag, was found by a woman walking her dog. She had no name, no missing persons report, and no immediate clues. This toddler, known only as Baby Doe, sparked one of the largest public identification campaigns in recent history. For months, police faced silence, online theories, and mounting pressure, until a digital reconstruction and one anonymous tip shattered everything. Her name was Bella Bond, and the truth was far darker than anyone imagined. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Bella Nevaeh Amoroso Bond was born on August 6, 2012, in Boston, Massachusetts. Her life was supposed to be filled with lullabies, bedtime stories, and the safety every toddler deserves. But Bella's short existence unfolded in the shadows, behind closed doors, beneath the weight of addiction, poverty, and a system not built to catch every falling child. She lived in Dorchester, a Boston neighborhood filled with working-class families and generations of complex stories. Bella shared a home with her mother, Rochelle Bond, and Rochelle's boyfriend, Michael McCarthy. By the time Bella turned 2, she had already become part of a world shaped by instability. Her mother had a long history of drug abuse and had previously lost custody of 2 children. Her father, Joe Amoroso, was not in her life and had never met her in person, though he occasionally spoke with Rochelle on the phone. Despite that, neighbors occasionally spotted Bella. She looked cared for on the outside, always in clean clothes, her wavy brown hair growing long, ears pierced. A little girl with a quiet presence and big, curious eyes. Some even commented she looked well-fed, as though her mother made an effort to keep her appearances in order. But behind the front door, the reality was far darker. No one registered Bella for daycare. She wasn't part of any early childhood program. There were no pediatrician visits that showed up on record in her final year. The Department of Children and Families had responded to 2 previous neglect complaints, but both cases were closed without follow-up. Then, sometime in May or early June 2015, Bella vanished. There was no Amber Alert, no missing child bulletin, no public plea from her mother or family. When concerned acquaintances casually asked where the child was, they were told Bella had been taken by the Department of Children and Families. Many believed it. After all, with Rochelle's history and the instability of the household, state removal wasn't far-fetched. Weeks passed, then months. Bella's toys disappeared from the apartment. Her laughter no longer echoed through the building's thin walls. And yet, no one reported her missing. Not even her father, who hadn't seen her, but had recently spoken to Rochelle and was under the impression Bella was fine. To the outside world, Bella Bond had become invisible. But how does a child vanish completely? From family, from community, from the systems meant to protect her, and no one notices? How does a 2-year-old go missing, and no one reports her gone? By the early summer of 2015, Bella Bond had disappeared from public view. There was no news report, no alert bulletin, no televised search. She was just gone. Inside the Dorchester apartment she shared with her mother, Rochelle Bond, and Rochelle's boyfriend, Michael McCarthy, the silence surrounding Bella's absence grew heavier by the day. When neighbors asked where the toddler had gone, Rochelle told them the state had taken her, that the Department of Children and Families had come and removed Bella from the home. Given Rochelle's documented history of drug use and prior interventions by child welfare, the explanation seemed plausible. No one pushed harder for proof. But what actually happened within those walls was something far more chilling. According to Rochelle Bond's later testimony, Bella had been killed inside the apartment in a moment of terrifying delusion. She claimed McCarthy had become convinced the child was possessed by a demon. He ranted about dark spirits, paranoia creeping into his behavior. Then, one night, in a fit of rage or hallucination, he allegedly struck Bella in the stomach. Hard, multiple times. The blows, Rochelle said, left the toddler limp, her skin gray and swollen. Bella was dead. McCarthy, however, would later deny it all. He claimed Rochelle was the one who harmed Bella, and that she was now trying to deflect blame. Their stories conflicted. But the one thing both accounts agreed on was this: no one called 911. No one sought help. No one gave Bella a chance to be saved. Instead, they hid her. In the days that followed her death, Bella's body was placed in the apartment's refrigerator, tucked inside garbage bags, stored like refuse. For days, possibly weeks, her remains sat behind a closed fridge door in that small Boston apartment, while Rochelle and McCarthy continued on with life as if nothing had happened. At some point, the smell became too overwhelming, the risk of discovery too real. That's when the decision was made to get rid of her. One night, under the cover of darkness, McCarthy or Rochelle, or both, placed Bella's body into a larger trash bag, wrapped her in a zebra-striped fleece blanket, and drove out to the shoreline. They made their way to Deer Island, a peninsula jutting into Boston Harbor, home to a massive wastewater treatment plant and walking paths often used by locals. There, along a quiet stretch of shore, just feet from the waterline, the bag was placed, or perhaps thrown. There was no gravestone, no burial, no prayer. Just a child discarded like garbage. The island's rocky perimeter was unforgiving. Waves lapped against the coast, unaware of the horror that now rested among the seaweed and stones. Rochelle and McCarthy returned to their lives, maintaining the story that Bella had been taken by Child Protective Services. Days turned into weeks. No one came knocking. No one asked questions. Bella had vanished into silence, until fate and the curiosity of a dog would finally uncover the truth. On the afternoon of June 25, 2015, the tide rolled gently against the shore of Deer Island, a remote spit of land in Boston Harbor. It was a quiet day, marked by the usual rhythm of walkers, joggers, and dog owners enjoying the solitude of the peninsula. One woman, walking her dog near the shoreline, would soon stumble upon something that would shock the nation. Her dog veered off the path, tugging toward a pile of seaweed and driftwood near the waterline. Nestled among the rocks was a black plastic trash bag, torn slightly open. Inside, something small, pale, and unmistakably human. What she saw next was unspeakable. Inside the bag was the decomposing body of a young child, a girl no older than 3 or 4. She was wearing white leggings dotted with black polka dots. Wrapped around her tiny body was a zebra print fleece blanket. There were no shoes, no shirt, no visible scars or bruises, and no way to identify who she was. Panic set in. The woman immediately called the authorities. Within hours, police had secured the area. Crime scene tape was strung along the rocks. Investigators stood grim-faced against the salt air as they examined the child's remains. First responders, hardened by years of service, were visibly shaken. No identification. No medical alert bracelets. No sign of a parent nearby. No recent missing child reports in the area. Who was this little girl? The child's body was transported to the state medical examiner's office in Boston. There, forensic teams began the painstaking process of examining what they could. Her body was already bloated from decomposition, suggesting she had been dead for some time, possibly weeks. But her features were still just enough to suggest an age, between 2 and 4. Brown hair, approximately 14 inches long. Pierced ears. The autopsy was inconclusive. There were no clear signs of trauma. No broken bones. No skull fractures. No visible evidence of strangulation. But her condition was advanced enough that cause of death remained elusive. Toxicology tests were ordered. Specialists began checking missing persons reports statewide, and then nationwide. But nothing matched. The press was soon notified, and with no name, no family, and no clues, authorities gave her a placeholder, Baby Doe. It was a name that would capture the hearts and attention of millions in the months to come. The image of the polka dot leggings, the zebra-striped blanket, the haunting setting of her discovery. It was enough to stir the collective conscience of a nation. How could a child end up like this? Alone, discarded, and unclaimed. Police canvassed the area around Deer Island. Theories emerged. Had she washed ashore from another location? Could someone have come from out of state and left her there? The Massachusetts State Police began working alongside federal agencies, using ocean current models to map possible origins. Still, no definitive answers. As the investigation intensified, public outcry grew louder. Social media buzzed with photos from the scene, news clips, and questions. Everyone wanted to know who Baby Doe was. Somewhere, someone had to know the truth. But the body had no fingerprints to scan and no dental records to compare. That left investigators with one option: science, DNA, and facial reconstruction. The next move would come from a team who had faced the unknown before, experts determined to give this little girl her name back. With no name, no report of missing child, and no leads, investigators turned to one of the few tools left in their arsenal: facial reconstruction. They reached out to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, an organization known for taking the unknown and making it recognizable. What they would create in the coming days would become one of the most widely circulated child images in American true crime history. Using Adobe Photoshop and mortuary photos, forensic artist Christy Andrews carefully reconstructed the child's face. She added soft, wavy brown hair, large, rounded brown eyes, a tender, neutral expression that didn't distort reality but captured innocence, and something more: vulnerability. The resulting image looked so lifelike, so emotionally real, that many mistook it for an actual photograph. On July 2nd, 2015, just 1 week after the child's body was found, Baby Doe was introduced to the world. The image was everywhere. Billboards flashed across highways in Massachusetts and beyond. Facebook feeds filled with the photo. Television anchors pleaded with the public. Do you recognize this child? Over 56 million people viewed the image within weeks, half of them in the first few days. Offers poured in from funeral homes and community members to give the child a proper burial if she remained unidentified. The outpouring of grief, fury, and heartbreak was massive. But despite the tidal wave of attention, no one came forward. Leads trickled in, hundreds of them. Some thought she might be Isla Reynolds, the toddler who vanished from Maine in 2011. Others believed she looked like Aliyah Lunsford of West Virginia or Catherine Baby Kate Phillips of Michigan. Investigators checked records across the country. They compared DNA, photos, and medical histories. One by one, the names were ruled out. There were no matches, no hits in the National Missing Persons Database. Authorities even theorized she might have been the child of undocumented immigrants or from a family too afraid or too complicit to report her missing. The idea that a child could disappear, be found dead, and still go unnamed ignited outrage. Posters were distributed nationally. Detailed photos of her polka dot leggings and a zebra print blanket were released in enhanced format. Each thread, each pattern became another plea for someone to recognize the child, to step forward and say, "I know her." But the silence persisted. Behind the media storm, a darker truth loomed. Someone, somewhere, did recognize her, and chose to say nothing. A neighbor, a relative, a friend, someone who had seen Bella Bon alive, who had watched her play or cry or nap by a window, and then noticed she was gone. That person kept the secret. Investigators, meanwhile, kept working behind the scenes. They ordered advanced toxicology tests, sent samples for isotope analysis, used ocean current models to narrow down how the body arrived at Deer Island. They built a complete profile, hoping one tiny detail might connect her to someone, somewhere. Still, Bella remained Baby Doe. Her story was now etched into the American consciousness, a symbol of the voiceless, a tragedy without closure. Every week that passed deepened the mystery. How could no one in her life come forward? And if someone did know, why hadn't they spoken? The image, now iconic, continued to circulate. Her haunting eyes stared from posters, news broadcasts, and social media. The world grieved her. But the truth, the one name that could close the case, remained buried. By mid-September 2015, nearly 3 months had passed since the little girl's body was discovered on the shores of Deer Island. Despite the overwhelming national attention, billboards, and millions of views online, the child known only as Baby Doe remained unidentified. Investigators were running out of time and hope. Then came a whisper, a quiet tip that would shatter the silence. It started with a neighbor in Dorchester, Massachusetts, someone who had lived near Rochelle Bond and Michael McCarthy. This neighbor noticed that a toddler who once lived in the apartment was no longer around. Her name, they recalled, was Bella Bond. She hadn't been seen in months. No goodbyes, no moving trucks, just gone, the neighbor told her sister. Her sister, sensing something was deeply wrong, made the call to law enforcement. The connection was tentative but chilling. Could Baby Doe be Bella Bond? Investigators acted immediately. They pulled child welfare records. There was no indication that Bella had been removed by the Department of Children and Families, despite what Rochelle had told neighbors. No caseworker had filed reports. No court documents existed. There was no trace of Bella Bond in any active state custody. Police quickly moved to search the apartment Rochelle shared with Michael McCarthy. Inside, they found remnants of a child's presence, scattered toys, an empty crib, tiny articles of clothing. But more disturbing was what wasn't there. No signs of a current toddler living in the home. Bella's things were old, boxed up, or missing entirely. It was as if she had been erased. A cadaver dog was brought in. The dog immediately reacted near the refrigerator door, a strong indication that a body had once been stored inside. It was the break investigators had waited for. On September 18, 2015, officials confirmed what many feared and others suspected. The girl found on Deer Island was Bella Nevaeh Amoroso Bond. She was just 2 years old. The news sent shockwaves across Boston and across the country. The mysterious Baby Doe finally had a name, a life, a neighborhood. The image millions had grieved now belonged to a real child, one who had slipped through the cracks of the very system designed to protect her. But naming her was only the beginning. Rochelle Bond and Michael McCarthy were taken in for questioning. Both repeated the same story they had given before, that Bella had been taken by state services. But their claims didn't hold up. There were no documents, no witnesses, no official visits. When pushed, cracks began to show. Investigators now had physical evidence, a witness tip, and probable cause. Still, they needed more. The truth about what happened behind that apartment door. And that truth, it seemed, could only come from Rochelle. The public watched in horror as details began to leak. A healthy, well-fed toddler. A smiling face once seen on a mother's Facebook page. Now reduced to a haunting mystery, discarded like trash. The community that hadn't even known she was missing now wanted answers. And justice. Authorities believed Rochelle held the key. But would she talk? And if she did, could her words be trusted? In the interrogation room, under fluorescent lights and the weight of mounting evidence, Rochelle Bond finally broke. For months, she had maintained the same brutal story, that Bella had been taken by state services. But confronted with the cadaver dog alerts, the missing records, and the undeniable truth that her daughter had been found dead on Deer Island, her resolve collapsed. Her voice shook as she began to speak. She told detectives that Bella had not been taken by anyone. She had been murdered. According to Rochelle, the killer was Michael McCarthy, her boyfriend. She described his spiraling paranoia, his obsession with dark ideas, and his growing belief that Bella, a 2-year-old child, was possessed by a demon. Rochelle claimed McCarthy spoke frequently about evil spirits, insisting that Bella's behavior was evidence of something supernatural. It was a delusion that escalated into violence. One night, she said, McCarthy snapped. He punched Bella repeatedly in the stomach while Rochelle, terrified and strung between fear and addiction, failed to intervene. By the time she entered the room, Rochelle told detectives, Bella was unresponsive, her small body swollen, her skin an eerie shade of gray. She was gone, but the horror didn't end there. Instead of calling 911 or seeking help, Rochelle admitted she assisted in hiding Bella's death. She confessed that they placed Bella's body inside the refrigerator, wrapped in bags, the cold air masking the evidence. Days passed, then weeks. Rochelle claimed she was paralyzed by fear, of McCarthy, of the authorities, of what the world would say when they learned she hadn't protected her daughter. Eventually, the smell became too strong. The risk of discovery grew. Rochelle said McCarthy then moved Bella's body, placing it in a larger trash bag, wrapping her in a zebra print blanket, and disposing of her in the harbor. It was the last time Rochelle saw her daughter. Her confession was long, fragmented, emotional, but investigators knew the truth was rarely simple. Rochelle had lied for months. She had hidden a body. She had protected the man she now claimed was a murderer. Could her new story be trusted? Prosecutors faced an excruciating decision. They needed Rochelle's testimony to secure a conviction against McCarthy. Without her, the case rested on circumstantial evidence. With her, they faced the challenge of presenting a deeply flawed witness, a mother who failed to report her daughter missing and who played a direct role in covering up the crime. Ultimately, the Commonwealth offered a deal. Rochelle Bond would testify against Michael McCarthy in exchange for time served in probation. She would walk free, but only if she told everything, openly, publicly, under oath. The arrangement sparked immediate controversy. Some saw it as a necessary compromise to bring Bella justice. Others believed Rochelle was equally responsible, if not more so. Her credibility would now become the central question of the courtroom battle to come. The truth, or at least Rochelle's version of it, was now on record. But truth in a criminal case is never simple. It is weighed, dissected, and scrutinized. Would a jury believe her claims about demonic beliefs, hidden bodies, and silent terror? Or would they see her not as a witness, but as an accomplice? 2 years after Bella Bond's tiny body washed ashore on Deer Island, the man accused of killing her stood trial. In June 2017, Michael McCarthy faced a jury in the eyes of a nation that had mourned the child once known only as Baby Doe. The charges were grim: second-degree murder. Prosecutors alleged that McCarthy, delusional and obsessed with dark, paranoid fantasies, beat Bella to death in a fit of rage. They said he believed the toddler was possessed by a demon, a belief Rochelle Bond would testify had been festering for weeks before Bella died. McCarthy's defense team countered with a different narrative. They painted Rochelle as an unreliable witness, a mother with a documented history of heroin use, lies, and neglect. They claimed she was the real killer, and that her testimony was a desperate act to save herself from prison. After all, she had already admitted to hiding the body and lying to police. Why believe her now? The courtroom was tense and divided. Jurors listened as witnesses described McCarthy's fascination with the occult, his unsettling rants about demons, and his increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to Bella's death. Friends and acquaintances testified that McCarthy often talked about cleansing evil and believed in supernatural forces. One even said McCarthy believed he had the power to exorcise spirits. But still, there was no forensic evidence tying McCarthy directly to the act of murder. No fingerprints, no DNA, no bruises on Bella's body that matched a specific pattern. The autopsy could not determine the exact cause of death. It was, in many ways, a trial built on testimony, not physical proof. Rochelle Bond's testimony was the centerpiece. She took the stand with a mix of defiance and emotion, detailing the night she claimed McCarthy struck Bella. Her voice cracked as she described watching her daughter go limp. She admitted to doing nothing. She confessed to helping store the body in the refrigerator, to watching McCarthy throw her child into the harbor. She spoke of being injected with heroin afterward, something she said McCarthy did to keep her quiet. But under cross-examination, the defense picked her apart. Her statements had changed. Her timeline shifted. She had lied to neighbors, to family, to investigators. She had continued using drugs after Bella's death. Could she be trusted? The jury had to decide whether her failings made her a witness or an accomplice. After weeks of testimony, legal arguments, and emotional strain, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Michael McCarthy was sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole in 2037. The courtroom exhaled, but the verdict did not bring celebration. There were no cheers, no sense of victory, just a grim acknowledgement of loss, of a little girl who should have been protected, of a system that failed her at every level. Even with the conviction, The case left behind deep wounds. Why hadn't anyone reported Bella missing? Why didn't state agencies follow up more aggressively on past complaints? Why did it take 3 months and a forensic artist's rendering for her identity to be known? The answers would have to wait, because even with a guilty verdict, the pain of this case was far from over. The trial of Michael McCarthy may have ended with a guilty verdict, but the case of Bella Bond, Baby Doe, left behind a storm of unresolved questions, outrage, and institutional reckoning. At the heart of the outcry was a single question. How did no one know she was missing? Bella lived in a major American city. She had neighbors, a father, albeit estranged, a mother who once posted her photos on social media. She had lived in the same apartment for most of her short life. And yet, for nearly 3 months, not one report of her disappearance was filed. No family member raised the alarm. No friend demanded answers. No school or daycare ever noticed her absence because she was never enrolled. She had simply vanished, and no one asked why. The anger intensified when, in February 2017, Rochelle Bond was sentenced to time, served, and 2 years of probation as part of her plea deal in exchange for testifying against McCarthy. To many, it was a bitter pill to swallow. A mother who helped hide her child's murder, who lied to friends and investigators, would walk free, while her daughter lay buried beneath a headstone paid for by strangers. But prosecutors defended the deal. They argued that without Rochelle's cooperation, a conviction against McCarthy would have been almost impossible. There was no murder weapon, no confession, no direct forensic link. Rochelle's testimony, flawed though it was the linchpin. And so, the public was left divided between those who saw Rochelle as a mother complicit in her daughter's death and those who believed she was a victim of manipulation, addiction, and fear. Beyond the courtroom, state agencies came under fire. The Massachusetts Department of Children and Families, DCF, faced intense scrutiny. It was revealed that 2 prior neglect complaints had been filed regarding Bella, and both had been closed without any lasting intervention. In a system designed to safeguard vulnerable children, Bella had slipped through the cracks. Twice, lawmakers demanded accountability. Public hearings were held. DCF leadership faced calls for reform and resignation. There were pledges of better training, stricter follow-up procedures, and improved data sharing across agencies. But to grieving members of the community, the changes felt too little, too late. Bella's case exposed not just the failure of one system, but the silence of many. Neighbors who believed Rochelle's claim that DCF had taken Bella. Acquaintances who noticed the child's absence but didn't ask questions. A community that, in hindsight, felt paralyzed by apathy, disbelief, or fear. In the end, Bella Bond became more than a victim. She became a symbol of the unseen children across the country who suffer in silence, who go unmissed until it's too late. Her haunting image, once reconstructed by a forensic artist and shared with millions, now lives on in public memory. Her story prompted parents, teachers, and social workers to look closer, to ask harder questions, to report suspicions even when it feels uncomfortable. She inspired volunteers to get involved with foster care, advocacy groups, and child welfare reform. Candlelight vigils were held in her honor, and a memorial bench was erected near the shoreline where her body was found. But the most lasting legacy Bella left behind was a mirror held up to a society that often doesn't see what it chooses to ignore. On a cold November morning in 2015, Bella Nevaeh Amoroso Bond was finally laid to rest. She was buried in Winthrop Cemetery, a small plot nestled near the edge of Boston Harbor, not far from where her body had once washed ashore. This time, she was not hidden, not discarded. Her resting place bore her full name, etched into polished stone. The inscription was simple, solemn, and profound: Bella and Bond Amoroso. The date of death marked the day she was found. She would never again be known as Baby Doe. In the months leading up to her burial, Bella had become the face of a national outcry. Her digitally reconstructed image had traveled across billboards and news broadcasts. Her case had drawn the attention of millions. And though she was only 2 years old, Bella's short life had ignited a conversation about the very things society too often overlooks: child welfare, parental responsibility, and the power of community silence. The day of her funeral, hundreds of people came. Many had never met her. Most had only seen her face on a poster or screen. But they came with flowers, stuffed animals, and tearful prayers. Candles flickered in the wind. Some wept openly. Others stood in silence, heads bowed. One woman clutched a copy of the composite image. The face that had once symbolized a mystery, now resting with a name and a story. In her death, Bella bonded strangers. She drew together law enforcement, forensic scientists, advocates, social workers, and everyday citizens who simply cared. Local businesses helped fund memorials. A funeral home offered services. Community groups donated a memorial bench on Deer Island near where she was found. It became a quiet place of reflection, a space for grief, remembrance, and resolve. And though justice was slow and imperfect, the name Bella Bond became inseparable from a call to vigilance. Her story was taught in classrooms, discussed in legislative sessions, and used in training materials for child protective services. No longer a faceless victim, she became a haunting symbol of what happens when systems break down and when good people remain silent. For parents, her story served as a painful reminder of the fragility of childhood. For neighbors and friends, a lesson in the importance of speaking up. For government agencies, a wake-up call that paperwork and closed case files do not equate to safety. Bella's image remains online, still circulated in articles and memorial posts. But now, it's accompanied by her name, her story, and the hard-earned truth of what really happened. In a world flooded with headlines and tragedies, Bella's case left a permanent mark. She reminded us all that children are not invisible, and that even one lost child is too many. Her life, brief and filled with unseen suffering, now compels action. It challenges complacency. It demands we pay attention. Bella was loved by strangers who had never heard her laugh or seen her play. She mattered. She still does. And for every unseen child, for every small voice unheard, her story is a solemn plea. Don't look away. Not again. Bella Bond was just 2 years old when her life was stolen. And for nearly 3 unbearable months, the world didn't even know her name. Known only as Baby Doe, her image, a digitally reconstructed face filled with innocence and hope, traveled across the country. She was mourned by millions of strangers who grieved a child they had never met, but somehow felt they knew. Her case wasn't solved by forensic science alone. It was the courage of one voice, a neighbor's sister, that turned suspicion into action. It was the persistence of investigators who refused to close the case, who sifted through lies and dead ends to find the truth. It was a community's cry for justice that kept Bella's memory alive long after her voice was silenced. In the courtroom, her mother's haunting testimony revealed the horrors Bella endured. And with Michael McCarthy's conviction, there was at least a measure of justice, though incomplete and never enough. Because justice didn't come before failure. The systems designed to protect Bella let her slip through unnoticed. Twice. And the silence of those around her only made it easier. Bella Bond's story is more than a crime. It's a warning. A call to action. We must not be silent. We must not assume. We must look closer, speak louder, and act sooner. Bella mattered. Her life, her image, and her memory demand that we do better. Let her story live on, not just in heartbreak, but in change. For every unseen child, be the voice they never had.